I'd like to ask Scott Noble to come to the stage, and he's going to provide an update on within PERC, within the phenometric theme 1, an update on some of the field phenotyping platforms we've been developing within the initiative.
So maybe an apology is in order first. I think my previous presentations haven't been engaging enough, so whoever asked me to speak forgot that I've talked the last 2 times. So I'll try to do better, I guess. So as Andy said, I'm going to try and give a little bit of an update on mostly platforms within the Phenometrics group, things we've been developing. I've only got my name on here partially because there's just too many people that have been involved in this to get everybody on there, but I'll try and highlight as I go through who's on what, and if I leave you out, my apologies. So I think with the theme of mobilizing P2IRC, I think I took that to kind of mean, okay, we're 3 years in, where are we going? So I came across this as I was preparing this, and I'll read it quickly. I'm breaking the rules about not putting too many words on a slide, but the information to guide plant breeders in developing higher yielding varieties by selecting for specific physiological traits, which control the efficiency of water use, in this case, is not available at the present time. And going on, saying close cooperation will be required, however, between physiologists, physical scientists, and plant breeders in defining yield-limiting water use traits. Without a cooperative team effort, it is unlikely that the potential of breeding for physiological traits will be adequately tested on the results realized. So I think anybody in the room would be forgiven for believing me if I said that this was written as part of the P2IRC granting or one of our proposals. In fact, this was written about 1973 for a water use efficiency symposium and then published in 1974. And I think the one thing they've missed that would give this away as being old is they left out computer science and computing. In fairness to these guys, the department here just celebrated its 50th anniversary. This was 45 years old. So it was a pretty nascent field at the time, and that's obviously a big part of the collaboration and huge enabling factor in what we're doing. I just thought it was interesting that this was something that was recognized a long time ago, and it feels like we're finally kind of getting there, which I take some comfort in, I guess. So in that vein, in that spirit, I want to try and highlight as I go through here places where these platforms have been developed and are being developed where there's a collaborative element to it. And this image here, I think at first glance you don't necessarily see it, but in this picture we've got about 4 different groups within the project represented. We've got the drone flying up, you can barely see it there, but this is from somebody in Steve Shirtleff's group, Keshev. So the UAV is flying. In the foreground, we've got a downwelling spectral base station recording the ambient light while the drone is flying. In the background there's the plots, obviously, which have been put in by the field crews. But then there's also the camera on a stick, which represents a collaboration. That's something that I'll talk a bit more about later, but computer science kind of pioneered that and piloted it. And then we've kind of taken that on and made some refinements and improvements to it. So it's neat that it kind of captures a bunch of what's going on within the project. So within the presentation, a few things I want to try and convey, kind of just generally, where are we at? What are our capabilities? What do we have kind of ready to go or on the verge of being ready to go? Highlight how collaborations helped us get there. Try to give you an idea of what might be possible going forward. I certainly have some ideas from some of what Allison was saying in terms of some things we maybe need to think about. I probably won't talk a lot about what we need, but ongoing collaboration, if I forget to say it later, is a big one, particularly as we're moving in, we're getting data coming online, and that collaboration with computer science is becoming even more important as we go forward. So That picture didn't turn out this time either. Sorry, Steve. This is supposed to be a picture of a rust nursery mosaic. So this was an example of UAV data collected by Steve's crew and then processed. So a lot of work's been done on a collaborative effort there between the UAV data coming in and computer science in terms of getting a pipeline put together for those data to be put into, for orthomosaicing to be done, for corrections to be applied, visualization tools for examining the data. Those all represent a lot of effort in working together. Some new capabilities this year. There was some Western economic diversification funding that came through, and so Steve's crew was able to get some additional equipment, additional sensors, and then there's some additional ground vehicle support on deck for 2019. So Steve's group has been really active in getting out there and getting a lot of data that I think people are pretty excited about. I mentioned the camera on a stick, or COAST. So again, this is an example where computer science really took an initiative to, get something out there. And so the first round of this is pictured on the left. And, they were, I think, getting tired of being out in the field on this one. So we kind of brought it into our group. We were able to bring in some additional researchers as part of that, so people who hadn't been involved in the project, Sukbum Ko from electrical engineering, and a postdoc of his, Juan Yepes. And so we were able to address some of the firmware and hardware challenges that we had the first go-round, making mounting and positioning the cameras easier, making the mounts out of stuff that didn't rot, those sorts of things. And so that's been pretty good. We've gotten some interesting. I don't think we got quite as much deployed this year as we had hoped, but it's certainly we've been able to make some big improvements there, and there's some further improvements to be made. I've made up images that convey what's going on here in the past. I've never actually had the images to show what's this issue. So this is looking at one of these cameras looking at a plot on a day. So this is kind of a dawn to dusk. Not an even time interval, but just looking at how the light environment changes what things look like. So just highlighting the idea that if you're not really careful about when you're out there collecting data and the conditions you're collecting it under, you're comparing apples to oranges. The other neat thing is we were looking at some of these, and this is, I think we were looking at a video that William Vanderkamp from computer science put together from the images for us when we saw this, but you're able to see some things right around dusk and dawn in particular, where either the wind dies down and things sit still, or just you can see in here just the way the light is changing and highlighting different parts of the wheat, and the heads pop out more in some views than others. It's just really interesting and starts, you start thinking, if we hadn't had these views, if these cameras hadn't been sitting there collecting data, a picture every 5 minutes, I'm not sure we'd have seen that or really thought to consider it. It also shows that one of my summer students, Matt, was indeed out in the field collecting data that day, because he's pulled the camera down and with the camera just happened to take a picture there when he was pulling it down to pull the data off of. So some interesting things I think are coming out of that. PhenoDAC. If I had to pick on something to be what I think is going to be our single biggest contribution on the platform side of things, it's probably this. I'm only going to put one slide on it because if I were to go into details on this, everybody would, well, not everybody, but a good chunk of the audience would fall asleep. But basically what this is a software architecture we've put together to coordinate, to manage instruments, computer configurations, how we move instruments around. So this is what enables us to take a package of instruments from one platform, stick it on another, change a file, and go. To try to give an idea of what the challenge here is, the basic thing is we've got N cameras. We don't know how many cameras we might have on a particular platform, what they are, who the vendor is. We may not know any of that at the outset. We need to come up with a solution to be able to put all that together. We have an unknown number of different other instruments of different types. How do we coordinate all that? How do we make it all work and still make it scalable? You can't just keep adding cameras or instruments to a single computer ad infinitum. You hit some bandwidth issues pretty quickly. The issue of localization, and Allison mentioned this as an issue. How do we get those data about where things are, and how do we manage the metadata? The metadata is at least as important as the raw data itself. And then there's this question I get some version of, hey Scott, can we put this instrument on, choose your weapon of choice in terms of how you're taking that out there. And this software architecture lets us, in theory at least, say yes to that. The instrument packages really don't care what instrument or what platform they're put on. And so this opens up web interfaces to the instruments for configuration, for communications, and data management and metadata management as well. So this has been, a lot of work has been put onto this. There's one of our students has a poster on this. If you're interested in more details on that, you can talk to him and David Pastel. I don't know if Bronson's here yet, but Bronson Mazoka was a computer science student that we poached for the summer, which was fantastic. So yeah, if you're interested in more details about that, we can feel free to talk about that later. So I mentioned the idea of a payload, and so we've tried to standardize payloads to a certain degree so that we can move them between platforms. They're platform agnostic. Because of that PhenoDAC software, we can move them around at will, basically. And so we have when I say a payload, I'm kind of talking about the notion of a box, a module, and then we can put whatever instruments within that we want, basically. We're not really power limited on our platforms for the ground-based work anyway. So in this case, we've got this is looking at the bottom view. Where's my pointer there? This is the bottom view. So looking from this will be looking at the ground. So this particular unit has a LiDAR unit in it, an ultrasound unit, a few different cameras, infrared, RGB, and ultraviolet, spectrometers, and I think that's about it. And then the GPS for this is taken care of at the platform. So we don't necessarily have to move the platform, the GPS with the platform. And connectivity-wise, that's the other piece of the interoperability, is all this needs is power and connection to the local platform Ethernet or network to work. Where are we going? One of our platforms that this goes on is what we're calling Mini-PAM. This was, as this year came on and we kind of had the data acquisition things ready to go and we didn't have our main platform quite ready yet, we threw this together really quickly at the beginning of the summer, put the summer students on it, got it out there, and we got data anyway. So that was useful. We ran through, it's not an official P2IRC crop, but we were running through Kirsten's beans a fair bit because they were handy and very photogenic. We also got out in the Kernan trials a lot. And so this let us get there's some interesting data coming out of this. Where our pipeline kind of is at and where we need to get to is with now getting our data into databases so that we can query it, so we can actually pull out the data to get some interesting information out of that. And so that's something we're working with Ralph and Carl in computer science on. One example I think I have next of something we've been doing with this, and it kind of dovetails in a little bit with what Allison was talking about with the looking at the LiDAR and the cotton bolls through the canopy. We're kind of interested in how the biomass distribution in the canopy, what that looks like, how it changes, and how we might use technologies like LiDAR and ultrasound to study that. I've seen some work on that previously. We wanted to get in there and check it. So we had a couple trials where we were They were taking biomass every 10 centimeters through the canopy and taking the measurements. And there's a poster looking at some of that as well. So there's some interesting preliminary work coming out of that as well. I mentioned the mobile platform not being quite ready. This is kind of near the end of the summer, so it was a little late to get out there this year. But this is the mobile platform that we've been working on. Remote control, that idea. We haven't really, just coming around there, you can see the payloads on either side of it. So finally kind of there and about ready to go. So this has opened up some interesting opportunities, speaking of collaboration. I guess the first thing is this wasn't the original plan by any stretch for what our acquisition was going to look like. In the original proposal, it was something very different. And it was when we got into that first season, we realized, okay, there's some constraints we didn't understand, as we started talking more with not just the breeders and the people I was working with, but the field crews, and understanding the realities of how things have to happen right now. And so this was a big change to this type of platform in response to that. An interesting thing that's happened along the way is it's opened up some opportunities for collaboration. So some of you may be aware of the DOT Power platform that's been developed down in Regina, DOT Technologies. They incorporated a spin-off of, or a sister company of Seedmaster, which is an ag machinery company down there. The scale here doesn't really show it properly, but if I were to stand beside DOT, I would come up to about those black beams. It's so, yeah, the main frame is about this tall on that. PAM altogether is about that tall. So it's very different. So this is actually a platform for autonomous agriculture, field work. Interestingly enough, we made some similar design decisions along the way, different scales, but similar enough that we have an NSERC Engage grant right now with them looking at manual control strategies and using PAM as a test bench for the larger platform. And then there's also, I think, some opportunities there to work with them on incorporating some of their autonomous software or software for autonomous operation into our unit, which I think will, if that works, that's going to leapfrog us ahead a lot faster than we would have otherwise. So that's another area where collaboration is really yielding some good things. Some other things that we've been putting together, again, as we've worked with people and recognizing some of the needs we have, some different field support tools. And some of these are things that, you can make an argument one way or the other as to should we build it, should we buy it. We've kind of taken the approach that, we're putting a high value on having access to what's going on under the hood, being able to freely incorporate it into things. And just when we look at it, if we think, we can if we put a bit of effort in it up front, we're going to need a lot of this. So the economics make sense. So we've tried to apply that. So on the left here, we've got one of our summer students, Matt, using a Rtk GPS Rover for surveying that we put together. You can buy GPS units. We can put these ones together at a price that makes it well worth it to put our own together. And we have full access to what's going on under the hood. So this is the same GPS system that we run on PAM, on mini PAM, on all of our data acquisition equipment. So it's all cross-compatible. The spectral ground station, so I'd shown one of those in one of those first slides, collecting data in the field when the drone flights are going. The weather stations we have deployed also happen to have that's at the Kernan farm. That's our RTK base station for the GPS corrections, and then also we've got our not very portable garage, but it's still, we can park our equipment in there. And my vision for that is more that becomes a little bit more of a field lab that is available for people working out in the field, especially as we get data that we have to wrangle and maybe you want to go do some computation. So yeah, these have all kind of come about just seeing needs and being able to respond to them. some projects in the works quickly, and kind of what happens when you start talking to people. We had some stuff sitting around, so I think last summer we started putting together a conveyor-based system that you can take into the greenhouse, run the plants through it, take images. Instead of having the big multi-million-dollar installation where you take the plants get carried to the imaging, we take the imaging to the plants. And so we brought some people in, we kind of put the prototype together, brought some people in to look at it, got a little bit of feedback, and everybody was fairly positive about it, but they started asking questions. Scott, can we do roots? Well, you could, but this isn't really the right tool. Scott, can we do seeds? We could, but this isn't really what you want. So then that spawns other things, and what we've actually found is that we've kind of stepped back from that conveyor belt thing a little bit, because the more pressing needs seem to be these other things. So this is a prototype nearing completion of a seedling root imaging system that we're working on with Steve Robinson at AAFC for doing early germination studies on the roots. Right now it's a manual operation. This will be able to automate it and really increase the throughput significantly on that research. Another case here is our little seed imaging system. There's a lot of really interesting phenotypic traits that can be linked to genetics on lentil seeds in particular. And so we had some summer students working on this summer. So to be able to process more look at more seeds in the sample, get more information, and get some of the really, really fine salt and pepper type speckling on these seeds and start characterizing that. We can also get thickness with this, which is something you can't get with a normal 2D system. One that's in the works and didn't quite make poster this year was a small gantry-based imaging system that would go in the growth chamber. The idea was to actually suspend it from the light fixture, which might work at AAFC if their chambers have more structural integrity than the ones in the College of Agriculture, apparently. But it's a flexible enough design that we can adjust this a bit, and it's, the idea would be we can adapt it to whatever size we need to. On the research side, a couple things we're working on, and the research activity really is geared towards better understanding at a fundamental level what do these data we're pulling in mean. So even kind of pre-phenotype information. So we're looking at leaf optical properties modeling is one area. How do the surface properties of the leaf affect that? Is a big question. So my one student, Risha, has been developing some extended field of view microscopy techniques to characterize surface texture, as an example, and equipment for getting the directional properties of the reflected light and transmitted light. Also on the question of the thermal and Steve's question about the dynamics, that's something we've been looking at too. So Keith Halcrow is just finishing up his MSc and looking at that, and it is very dynamic. So yeah, we're very interested in using a modeling approach to kind of try and back out how the plants are responding differently and being able to not just do an adjustment on the temperature, but I think the dream here is to be able to actually say, what is in engineering we'd call it a transfer function, but how is the plant actually responding to inputs and stimulus? So I think there's some interesting opportunities there as well. Just to wrap up, coming back to to that paper I mentioned at the beginning, I won't go too more in here, but they recognize that there are needs in terms of, somebody's got to collect the data. This isn't something that's just going to happen on its own, and so there's that value proposition. We need to find those things that we're kind of still in the process of doing this, but what are the things that are of value? And we have to make sure that the infrastructure is there to measure those. And I think that's an ongoing conversation there. But in the end, they were fairly, 45 years ago, they were fairly upbeat about the prospects and the importance of it. I don't know if they thought it would take us this long to get there, but nonetheless, we're getting there now, and that working with people to the exchange of ideas is a really important part of that. And I'm one of the people who've been pleasantly surprised at how well it has worked. It's been really some good things are happening. Anyway, I think I'll leave there some acknowledgments. My staff, students. I realized partway through this I wasn't going to catch everybody, so I apologize if I missed you. Certainly, Steve and his crew we've worked with a fair bit, and they've really helped us out in the field, which has been very much appreciated. And other people who've been very supportive of this. So with that, I will stop talking, and thank you very much.